we can't overstate it enough. Like the numbers are alarming. There are more anxious people now than there are not anxious. And so when you really consider that, this is more than a phenomenon. This is I think, a paradigmal shift in the way that we live.
Welcome to Gap to Gig, the show for dads, reimagining how work fits into life, not the other way around. It's where we talk about what comes next, how to make sense of the in-between, and who we become in the process. I'm your host, Michael Jacobs, and today I'm sitting down with someone who understands men in a very real way. AJ Rich is a licensed marriage and family therapist, a practice owner, a clinical supervisor, and a doctoral candidate in psychology. After nearly 20 years in corporate roles, he shifted into full-time clinical work and now leads a thriving therapy group in Los Angeles. He works almost exclusively with men. Many are dads juggling identity, pressure, anxiety, and the rising expectation that men build emotional intelligence in ways earlier generations never had to. AJ also studies psychological well-being and organizational psychology while raising kids and managing the demands of his own business. This conversation is a chance to explore how men grow, adapt, and stay grounded in a world where everything feels louder, faster, and more unpredictable. AJ, welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you here today.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. I want to start with your personal turning point. You spent nearly 2 decades climbing the corporate ladder before changing direction. What was happening inside your mind during that period that pushed you to follow the path you've been thinking about for years?
Great question. I think there were a couple things that converged all at once. The first was I was in an industry where I could see that the end of it was coming. It was corporate retail, and our biggest competitor had closed, which was shocking to the world. And our president of the company also left the organization around that time. And so just the little tingles began about a year before I actually made the jump, where I was confronted with having to figure out what my career would look like for the rest of my life.
Sure.
And I think the way that I was able to actually do that was a lot of research and a lot of contemplation to figure out what it would look like and how it would fit into my life.
And you say a lot of research, but you also said it kind of sounded like in the beginning it was also a bit of intuition, right? Was there some sort of balance there between, was it the intuition that led you to do the research to figure out what you want to do next? Or was it, were they kind of part and parcel or together is one thing?
Yeah. I think they definitely fed into each other. The intuition was kind of the spark that said something has to come next, and the research was my way of figuring out what that actually meant and listening to my intuition maybe for one of the first times in my adult life.
Excellent. So many dads, they fantasize about a change like this, but they never make the leap. What helped you move forward instead of just staying comfortable in your old identity? Was it just the research, or was there's something else beyond that that helped you decide, you know what, this is it. I'm going to make that change.
Yeah. I think the biggest indicator was being a dad. My daughter was approaching the end of her elementary school years, and I was working 60 or 70 hours a week, had been her entire life, and didn't really think about anything different from that. So the research was to help me figure out if I was going to make such a drastic jump, one, how to make it possible. Money and finances were a big part of the research of
Right.
what I could do in the interim. I found a psychology program that allowed me to keep my full-time job for the first few months while I integrated into that. And then by the time the clinical portion kicked in, I had already kind of worked through the plan of what was going to come next. And we really had to buckle down as a family. It was a family decision. So getting my spouse and my child all involved in the decision took some time and some convincing.
Yeah.
And yeah, it really came to a head after a big work trip. I was laying on the floor of my office here in Southern California and just decided this is it. I've done all the work to get here, and now it's go time. And it was
Huh.
very scary, but in retrospect, very rewarding too.
Yeah, I bet. I bet. It's interesting. You mentioned that, well, it's your career that we're talking about. It was a group decision, essentially. It was a family decision, right? Your spouse, your daughter, like you you had to get everybody involved because ultimately you support each other, right? So if
Yes.
you're going to make this change, your spouse needs to be able to support you making that change, whether it's financial or psychological or emotional reasons, but also
Yep.
it's going to have an impact on your child too.
Yeah. And my daughter was really enthusiastic back then because, as I started to go back to school and have my textbooks out and everything, she was also, entering that phase of her own education. So we had lots of study nights together and tried to make it as routine into our life as absolutely possible.
That's awesome. I love that. You work almost exclusively with men, and you mentioned that developing emotional intelligence is something that men often could avoid before. Nowadays, with social media, with AI, and everything else, what does building emotional intelligence or EQ look like in a practical day to day way for the men you work with?
Mm. I think it starts with defining what EQ even means, right? I think many of us that are parents understand this because we see emotionally driven children until, life takes hold and that all gets worked out in the wash. But I think really understanding that we're not talking about something revolutionary here. We're talking about this idea that maybe these emotions that we all have that we're already experiencing are data and information that we should utilize just like we do cognition and thought and those other elements. So I think I start by just explaining like nothing groundbreaking is about to happen here. We're just going to tap into something that's always existed in you
Sure.
and see what comes up.
And when you do that with your clients, do you see I assume you see some resistance. It's from some of them, but you also can clearly explain the benefits to looking into EQ. But if somebody feels embarrassed or unsure or afraid of looking weak by addressing their emotional intelligence, what what is that resistance that's kind of holding them back?
There's tons of emerging data coming out right now that has transformed the way I think about this. Up until maybe a year ago, if we had been having this conversation, I would have a completely different answer. But what we're learning through the benefit of technology is that we're actually emotional creatures who think. We always thought we had the thought and then the tears came to our eyes. But now, because we've been able to dig deeper, we understand that it happens the other way around. The tears to your eyes over the deceased loved one that you're thinking about arrived before the thought of them. And so when I see some resistance in a client or potential client, I start by that. We're just honoring what already is and getting you to recognize that yes, the emotion actually does arrive first. What is it? What's it even called? I think another tangible exercise that I use with a lot of my clients is just a basic feelings wheel. I think if you ask most men, we have, a handful of emotions that we can recognize. And
Right.
so showing something that has those five primary or six primary emotions and then branches out to, hundreds and if not thousands of emotions is a good way of just developing vocabulary and explaining what you're already experiencing. So the difference between like dread and overwhelm, right? Two distinct emotions, but probably would fit into the same category in regular speech. And so it's explaining kind of the biological impacts as we're discussing here, the emotional creatures who think, along with language and thought to even explain what EQ is and
Right.
how it could be utilized.
Right. I think as a dad myself, yes, I know I have emotions. I don't express them often, right? I know I have them and I know they show up and it's maybe beyond my conscious control. Like subconsciously I must be displaying them. But I think what hit me was when you said there's a vocabulary, right?
Mm,
Just learning the vocabulary of it is I think as dads, oftentimes we're so focused on everything around us, we oftentimes forget to focus on ourselves. And it's hard to express that because we don't have the right words. And I think when you said like using that emotion, the wheel of emotions and talking about or having a vocabulary to describe what you're feeling, for me at least, feels like it's missing, right? Like I think I need a better vocabulary. And it really it's really impactful to hear that, like, yes, you can, it's okay to have emotions, first of all, right? Everybody has them. It's okay to express them, but to address them, to have language to be able to communicate that to someone. I never really thought about it because obviously I'm thinking about 100 other things going on during the day, whether it's taking care of my kids, taking care of my work, whatever it may be. We can't forget about ourselves, and having vocabulary to explain kind of what we're feeling seems like there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of us as dads, or at least me as a dad, determine like figuring out what that vocabulary is and starting to integrate that into life. So it was I find that very interesting. I appreciate
Yes.
you sharing.
People are struggling with this. Like, okay, sounds great. I'll Google a feelings wheel and start coming up with language. I'd also recommend there's some really quality research in the last couple of years by Brene Brown. She did a 4-part docuseries on HBO Max for her book called Atlas of the Heart. So you could read the book, which is a great descriptor of kind of emotions overall and how they get integrated and help with that development of language. Or if reading is not your thing and you would rather watch something, what I really like about that docu-series is that they present film clips to differentiate between different emotions. So
Yeah,
you can really see how you feel as you watch it and if you can kind of recognize what they're talking about on screen. And most of us are much better at spotting it in somebody else than they are in
right.
than we are in spotting it in ourselves. And so seeing it presented in that way is a really helpful tool that I offer to many of my clients at the beginning of our work in therapy.
Interesting. And we'll make sure to link to those resources in our show notes as well.
Great.
So recognizing these emotions and be able to communicate them out is important. But at the same time, a lot of dads often feel overwhelmed by the pressure to grow, perform, be present at home, be present at work. How do you help someone define growth in a way that feels sustainable, grounded?
One, I usually start with slower roll. Like before we grow, we gotta tend to the root system,
Yep.
figure out what happened, why we are the way that we are. And, this will be my only plug for this, but that's a great topic to go start therapy about is just kind of figuring out what is. I'm also a big personal believer that I only focus on growth when I'm moving my body. And so I am not, when I'm lazy on the couch on a weekend, is not the time for me to be thinking about how to accelerate my career or grow my practice even more. And so I've kind of made a commitment to myself that if I'm walking the dogs or exercising, that is a chance where I'm already kind of attuned to growth in another way. And then I'll bring in something about expansion or a podcast or listen to something that helps me think about expanding even more.
Yep. Do you feel that by setting up these kind of defined times or defined activities to address some of these emotional needs, that helps you kind of create a routine, or is it just that's what works for you? Or is it like doing exercise or going for a walk? That's like, okay, now I know that's my time to put on my thinking hat.
Yeah, I think it's more the latter. I recognize that I'm already motivated. If
Yep.
I've got my sneakers laced up and I'm already moving, that's a chance where I'm probably more in balance than I was before. So
Sure.
that's my indicator to even begin digging into growth and expansion. But if I'm not doing that, I just kind of shut down that little voice that's saying, do more, grow more, expand more, and say, like, not the time, not the place. And so I do use a routine. I'm generally moving my body around the same times. And so I'm listening to some of this growth stuff at the same time as well.
Got it. That makes sense. So I've seen a lot that anxiety numbers for men are rising. And I know of many dads, myself included, that have suffered from anxiety. And it's it's a tough thing to go through, but it's something that you can, or at least I found that I can manage, right? it takes work, it takes time, it takes, a commitment to manage it. Are there patterns or triggers that show up most often with dads that you found that do have suffer from anxiety?
Yes. And we can't overstate it enough. Like the numbers are alarming. There are more anxious people now than there are not anxious. And so when you really consider that, this is more than a phenomenon. This is I think, a paradigmal shift in the way that we live. I think a couple things come to mind. One is we're witnessing in real time news throughout the globe, which never existed before. And it's hard not to feel anxious when so much data is coming in. So I usually start there with a client who presents with some clinical anxiety about kind of broad existential worry and fear, and then bring that into your individual life and really figure out, like, what are you most concerned or worried about? And are there other ways, coping strategies that we could deal with those thoughts and feelings as they present themselves?
Got it. Got it. And is it possible for your clients to kind of come to you and be like, yes, I feel like I'm having anxiety. These are the things that I see. Or is it something that somebody on the outside is like, oh, you're probably suffering from anxiety because I see X, Y, and Z?
I'd say it's pretty evenly split if I think about it. Many times it does take the prompt of a spouse or somebody on the outside to say,
Sure.
this feels outside of the norm for you. And I think I want to be conscientious here. There's a distinct difference between fear and worry, which we all experience from day to day, and clinical anxiety, which is impacting your social life, your professional life, or your home life in a way that is distracting and taking away time. And that is really the indicator light, in my clinical opinion, that it's time to seek some professional help or try to figure out what's going on there. When you realize that you'd rather be doing something or rather be focused on something, but the thought or fear or worry is so strong that you can't, that is where I think we turn a corner into clinical anxiety.
Got it. Oh, that makes sense. And so your doctoral work focuses on psychological well-being, if I remember correctly. How do you define psychological wellness in a way that makes sense to dads today who feel overloaded? What does that really mean?
Yeah. When I began my dissertation, this was the big question: is you can't just say what is psychologically well without expanding and defining what that actually means. Where I draw from is the University of Pennsylvania's definition, which is used in an acronym called PERMA. That's equal representations of these five components: positive emotions, engagement, positive relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. And so when I'm really thinking with a client or even just with a friend or family member about overall well being, I'm kind of scanning those five categories. And I think if you can hit on all five, you're one of the very few lucky people in
Sure.
the world. But generally, I'd say to feel somewhere in balance, you need to have three or four of those elements working in a positive direction, or have a plan to make them work in a more positive direction in order to be considered psychologically well using this definition.
And are any of those five more important than others, or are they all kind of equally weighted?
They are equally weighted according to the researchers who developed them. However, they have a lot of overlap and parallels, meaning it might be hard to be engaged with something if you have a negative relationship with the person in which you want to engage with those activities with. So oftentimes you might need to focus on one of those elements first, and then by focusing on it and confronting it, maybe other elements come in into balance in a way that you wouldn't have expected, or without dedicated work on that specific secondary element.
Okay, so when someone feels like they've lost their sense of self in work, parenting, or maybe they're just in survival mode, where do you start to help them kind of rebuild a clear identity?
I think it's important to start with figuring out which silo of identity is the most impacted. Most of us are balancing 3 or 4 primary identities all at once, right? A family life, a professional life, a social life, and all of those have their own identity characteristics. So I'd probably start with figuring out which one's the most impacted negatively. And the other thing I'd say is putting some action to it, right? We can talk all day long in therapy about how I'm feeling and what it might be, but to me, what I try to do with my clients and with myself is design some kind of challenge to explore this and see if I can make some difference. So, and I'm not talking about some big fundamental challenge, but if I'm having trouble with meaning, for instance, then I might really focus on like, do is my professional identity feeling fulfilled right now? Do I feel like I'm actually helping the clients and patients that come to me? And if that's not the case, then I might design a plan to do an additional training or to try a different approach with a particular client to see if that gets us unstuck. So I think it's really important to frame out what we're working on and then develop some tangible action oriented steps to see if we can make a difference on it.
Sure. And you're saying that those tangible action oriented steps don't necessarily have to be these grand gestures or grand actions. You can really start small and kind of build along the way. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes,
Yeah.
please do that
Yeah.
because I think sometimes this is the challenge, right? If the challenge itself is too large, then you're not going to attempt it, or
Right.
the first roadblock you experience with it, you're not going to persist. And so I'm a big believer in staircasing out goals, objectives, action orientation, and taking into consideration your real life too.
Right.
You don't have we don't have time to take an additional training class right now because it's the holidays are upon us or whatever is going on in your life. And
Right.
so really small nibbles to see if they're making a difference. And then you could take larger bites as you make the positive progress that you're hoping for.
Yeah. Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. One step at a time and just keep putting one foot in front of the other and you'll continue to make progress. But if you just stand there and just let it all fall, then you're not actually moving forward. You're just you're staying in place, which is not where you want to be if you feel like you're losing yourself in whatever aspect of your life you're in.
Exactly. Exactly.
Makes sense. So I want to shift this just a little bit to the kind of the career front for dads. And for dads who are navigating career uncertainty, whether it's economic times or there's this rapid technological change we're going through right now, particularly with AI, how do you help them find a healthier relationship with confidence?
Mm, mm. It's an excellent question
Thanks.
because what I'm being confronted with over and over again is a lack of confidence. I think that actually links back to what we were talking about with anxiety in some ways too, is with all this data, with all this information, with so much at our disposal, I think that it's eroded confidence more than helped people or been a tool to expand upon it. And I'd also say, like, where I generally start would be at home. If we need to work on just generalized confidence,
Yep.
is there something that you can do that you wanted to do with one of your kids, right? Can you get down on the floor and stay in the tea party with your daughter for 45 minutes or so? Or do you feel that itch the second that it starts to feel weird or strange, or she asks you to say or do something that you don't want to do? And I think kids are a great conduit for this because they're going to always make us feel more confident
Yep.
if we engage with them on a full level. So I think dads can often start there. Get your house in order is kind of my big statement in therapy. Like, be confident about that. Is everybody flowing together in the way that you hope they would? Are the relationships as strong as you hope that they would be? And then once that house is in order, I think then we can expand to professional pursuits, career shifts, all of these other categories that we're talking about.
Got it. Yeah, I love that. I like that you can you're making the steps attainable by starting at home, right?
Mhm.
You can't control everything, right? And uh, just trying to make home a little bit better for yourself and for your family can give you a little bit more confidence as you address what's going on in your work life or your social life or whatever else you may be doing with your life, your volunteer life, whatever it might be. Um, and you can always address what's going on at home. That is one thing where whether you're the parent or even the child, like you have some say in what happens in the house. And to make it attainable, but also it's almost a relationship builder with your own family too, right? Like you're putting in a little bit extra effort now at home and yes, it's going to help build your confidence, but it's also going to strengthen your relationships, I think, right? Which then will, I assume, help build your confidence further. So when you do your go back into work mode, you have a little bit more confidence to address whatever concerns that you have at work. So I like how that's just like a great first step because it is attainable, right? It's not like, oh, you need to study these 7 things and then take this test and figure out like, can you do this? Can you not? No, you can do that, right? You do it every day. It's just a matter of, can you make it a little bit better? Can you strengthen that? Can you give yourself a little bit more confidence in the house? That confidence will carry over elsewhere, or at least show you that, yes, you can do this at home. You could probably do it elsewhere too.
Yes. And I think you nailed it on the head when you talked about control, because I
Mm,
think confidence and control often work in tandem with one another. When we feel out of control,
yep,
our confidence diminishes in some ways. And where else do you get to practice being the CEO? And pretty much, you might have a co-CEO and your spouse, but
right.
pretty much get to make the decisions that you want to make and then get to see how those are impacted before you consider doing that in the workplace or for your own business or whatever it might be.
Yeah,
You want to make sure that in areas where you do have more control than others, that you run it in the way that you want it to,
right.
because you're going to need all those skills when control is more limited
Yeah,
within work business.
right. So let's uh, let's flip the script on this a little bit in that we talk about control. You work oftentimes with recovering perfectionists, people pleasers, people that have a different type of control. How do those traits show up uniquely for dads trying to succeed at work and at home?
So I think the first thing in recognizing perfectionism, people pleasing, these are all what I would consider psychological defenses. These are your system's way
Yeah,
through life of trying to keep you safe. And so, if we want to confront any of them or other defenses, such as abandonment or other things that you're probably ultra familiar with, we have to recognize the source. Where did that come about? Where did you even get the idea that being really available to somebody else is a way of being chosen? And is that really how you want to be chosen? I think we have to really question the premise. And men often struggle with this exercise because we don't really want to go backwards. We just want to fix what currently is.
yeah,
And so a lot of my work, as you can imagine, is convincing people that the past matters a whole lot,
yeah,
not to blame or for any other reason, but just to simply understand, because you have to recognize that you are being defensive by people pleasing or whatever else you're doing
sure.
in an effort to try to keep yourself safe. And when you recognize that there's other ways that you can do that, that are probably healthier, more comprehensive for you, that's where we can begin to make a difference there.
That makes sense. That's really interesting that taking a look back at the past. I, I tend to, I think, at least for me, and I think there's probably some other dads out there that we're always looking forward, right? Like what comes next, right? But sometimes some of our maybe not great habits or some of our tendencies clearly come from someone or something in the past that kind of programmed us to be like, okay, this is how you handle this thing. And I don't think enough about looking back when oftentimes I tend to focus on just looking forward, but it makes sense to look back to figure out, to get the reasoning why you're doing the behavior so that you can address that behavior,
Yes.
right?
I also think many people assume this is going to be some big epiphany. You're going to unlock some trauma history that you're not going to know what to do with. Many times I'm hearing something like, my very first boss was really hard on me.
Yep.
And so ever since then, I've just tried to stay ahead of whatever boss wants.
Yep.
Right. And that's totally understandable. There's no big trauma to unpack there, but just understanding, oh, right. The second that I started working, I had somebody who was really diligent about picking my work apart and wanted me to do an excellent job. And so I've just decided that this defense is going to work for me. But again, like we were talking about with other emotions and elements of the past, generally these are little blips of something that happened that once you kind of speak it into existence, you can be like, oh, yeah, like not every boss since then has been like that.
Right.
Many bosses actually don't like my over communication or whatever it might be. And that might fix it all on its own by just recognizing that initial trigger point.
Yeah. That's a great point. You said speaking it into existence kind of makes me think about what you said earlier when it came to the wheel of emotions and just having that vocabulary. It's almost in a way having vocabulary for why you do the things that you are doing that maybe you don't want to continue to do, right? It's
Yeah.
finding what is it that caused that? Like, what are the words that help you identify what that is? So you be like, okay, it was the way I wanted, my boss wanted things. But like you said, your current boss might not have that same demand or even appreciate that kind of work. It might actually work to the negative. So it's like finding out why you're doing that so that you can identify it so you can be like, okay, now I'm cognizant of it. Now I can shift how I address that going forward.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's interesting how emotion, the same thing you do with emotions is this kind of the same thing you're doing here with figuring out like why you do some of the things that you do. It's
Yeah.
never made that connection before. It's fascinating.
Yes. And I think it demystifies this idea that like therapy or unpacking even on our own, our backgrounds is going to be some labor intensive process. And for many people, it is because they have had those lived experiences. But for the vast majority of people that I work with, we're generally talking about little blips and moments in sixth period of 10th grade that just
Yep.
I forgot the assignment, and ever since then, I promised myself I never miss an assignment again. And as soon as the person says it with the vocabulary, you can almost see in the therapy room just the, oh my gosh, this is so much simpler than what I was expecting.
That's awesome. I love that. All right. I want to move along to kind of tackling the other end of this spectrum, which is dads who want to continue to grow, but maybe they feel like they've hit a ceiling and they've kind of now they feel stuck. Like they've accomplished a lot, but and they want to accomplish more, but they don't know what to do next. How do you what's the first question you ask them to get unstuck, or how do you help them identify what might be holding them back?
I think my very first question would be, describe the top floor before you broke the ceiling. What
Hmm.
was going on in that moment that made you think that was kind of the top floor or the ending? Right. And I think what I often hear in response to something like that was, I hit the salary amount that I wanted to make, or I received the job title that I've been hoping for since I graduated from college. And then we have some actual elements to begin unpacking and figuring out, okay, so if we could go back and rewrite the story and come up with a secondary goal for that version of you, what else is in the suitcase of ideas and possibilities for you? What do you actually think would be meaningful? I often ask people also when they're contemplating this at the beginning, what do people that love you tell you? If you sit back and listen at a holiday party or something like that, people are always telling people what they see positive in them,
Yeah.
right? When I first got introduced to you, I told you, you have a voice for radio. Like you're
Right.
doing what you're supposed to be doing,
Yep.
right? Not only do I think that that helps build confidence for many people, but I think it also presents this idea that there are no ceilings, right? Like life is an infinite possibility. And you can do whatever it is that your heart desires. You just got to find the way to do it and then actually devise the plan. But focus on your strengths, focus on what the people that love you are telling you about yourself and see if that branches off into something that's a good idea for you.
That's awesome. That's so smart to not just focus on the positives, but think about how other people perceive your positive strengths so that you can use that to kind of now re-identify what your new goals are. I can see how that would help get unstuck very quickly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
You see men now who want to go deeper, not just talk about the surface problems. I know you said a lot of your clients, it's not necessarily they're coming to you because they've had some traumatic past where there's a lot of unpacking to do. But sometimes, there's somewhere in between that, like the surface level stuff and the deep level issues. What helps a dad shift from kind of coping to genuine transformation if they're kind of in between?
I think this is where most of us are. And I want to just say that first, which is I think most of us reside somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
And maybe the very first thing I might offer is, do you recognize that you're in the majority? Like you're not far behind and you're not far ahead. You're with me
Yeah.
and many others like us. And just kind of normalize that experience. And then I would also explain the difference between thriving and coping. I think this is a big talking about that feelings wheel and kind of digging in a little bit.
Yeah.
Coping is like getting through,
Yeah.
keeping an Advil to tame the headache that you
Sure.
have. Thriving is eating healthy, sleeping well, doing all of these things to ward off as frequent of headaches as you're getting. And once we kind of establish where we are between coping and thriving, then we can begin to develop some actual tangible skills to move you to the thriving category, which is what we all want at the end of the day, I think.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. One more question before we go to the speed round. If a dad is listening now feels anxious or overloaded or just unsure of what to do next, what's one thing they can start doing now that can help them start moving toward feeling psychologically well again?
Mhm. I think not just dads, but men in general, where I generally point people is start with your anger.
Hmm.
Even if you have a great handle on your anger, explore it as its own entity and see what comes up. Because if we can generally tackle anger as an emotion, then the other emotions that are going to come up or maybe branch off from there are going to come into view in a way. And I also think men who can kind of better manage their anger one day from the day previous see the benefit of doing this work more deeply,
Sure.
right? So anger is an emotion that we're all familiar with, even if we're running a master class on handling our anger, which I'm not, and many of the men that I know are not doing.
Right.
But even if they were, there's still room to learn there.
Absolutely.
And talking about like coping versus thriving, I would say thriving with anger is not letting the temper rule, letting the person rule. And so this is the emotion that I generally start with most men, unless there's some other pressing issue to get started with.
Sure. Sure. Makes sense. All right. I want to change things up. We're going to do speed round, which is a bunch of questions about nothing at all, but everything in the world depends on this. So this is important, but no, it's really just fun. I'm excited to see where you go with these questions. So 5 quick questions. What's the first kids show theme song that comes to mind?
My daughter's a freshman in high school, so what first comes to mind is two shows, Doc McStuffins
Yes.
and Sophia the First,
Oh, yes.
for the two songs that played for 5 or 10 years in my house on repeat over and over again. And so those are the first two that I think of.
Yeah, my daughter is a freshman in high school as well, and I forgot about Sophia the First, but my goodness, there were many years of the daily The first song.
Yes.
The Doc McStuffins does not get out of my head. I will always sing the Doc McStuffins theme song. That is, they won that jingle
Yes,
for
yes,
sure.
it was really good.
Um,
What shows
oh,
even are there, right? Like, I'm thinking I probably watched 1,000 of each of those shows, so I've heard the songs 2,000 times collectively.
right, exactly, exactly. There were so many episodes, and even if there weren't, it just seemed like there were. What was your very first job?
My very first job was a sandwich artist at Subway,
Oh, wow.
and I worked there for about 2 weeks, and then I got a second job in Food Avenue in Target, which younger people watching don't even know what Food Avenue is. There's been a Starbucks inside of most Targets for many years now, but back then we used to pop popcorn and walk it around the store and sell it to people, and I loved it. It was so fun.
Awesome, very cool. Would you rather spend 24 hours with a toddler-sized T-Rex or a T-Rex-sized toddler?
Oof, neither. I'd say the toddler-sized T-Rex only because I feel like I might have a shot at some level of control there, but they're both uncomfortable to contemplate.
For sure. For sure. Right. I do appreciate the honesty up front of neither would be the preferable answer. I think that's where most of us would go. Few will admit, but that's
Yes,
mostly.
yes.
What's your go-to karaoke song?
Ooh, this is a good one because I have to reveal my one and only party trick by giving you the answer, which is I do a mean "This Is How We Do It" by Montel Jordan at
Oh, wow.
karaoke, and for anybody listening, if you don't feel like you're a very good singer, which I'm not, but you wanna get the crowd going and have a blast, do that song and see what happens. Most people react positively to that song on karaoke.
Interesting. Interesting. That's great. What's the weirdest thing you've ever carried around in your bag, briefcase, or pockets?
So I carry a magic wand in my bag for work because I do a kind of therapy called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which requires it. So anytime I'm cleaning out my bag and the wand pops out, if there's anybody around, they're like, "What's that about?" But it's my magic wand that I wave in front of my clients for that particular type of work.
Nice. Very cool. I appreciate you answering those speed round questions. Before we wrap up, I want to give you space to share your work with anyone who wants to go deeper. Where can people find you and learn more about your practice, your team, the work you're doing?
Yeah, they can find out all of the information about my practice at ajrichtherapy.com. And they can always email me too at aj@ajrichtherapy.com.
Excellent. We'll put all that in the show notes as well. AJ, thank you so much for this conversation. You brought so much clarity and honesty and honestly just a lot of steady guidance to topics that I know so many dads are wrestling with right now, myself included. Your work, your research, your lived experience, I think that gives men and dads in particular hope that change is possible, right? Like you gave us very actionable ideas, very approachable, attainable concepts to work with. So I appreciate you joining the Gap to Gig community today. Thank you for taking the time to chat with me. And finally, if you're a dad listening to this and trying to figure out what comes next, maybe you're in between jobs, starting something new, or just looking for more meaning in your work, head to gap2gig.com and subscribe to the Gap to Gig newsletter. And if you took something valuable from this episode, send it to a dad you think could also benefit. Until next time, I'm Michael Jacobs, and this is Gap to Gig, where you're building work that fits your life, not the other way around.